Today we're talking about design, which naturally brings my monologue to ask, as a brand, as a design team, or even just as a designer, how can you be more proactive and efficient? Grow and strengthen your design team, find the right talent for the job, and improve the value and quality of your work. The answer to all these questions is DesignOps. And today we have a panel of experts who bring with them decades of experience working for some of the biggest brands on the planet to discuss not only what DesignOps is, but also to move away from theory and discuss practical, real-life examples of how DesignOps works and how it can work for you. I will assume that many of you are here because of the caliber of the panel we have lined up, and I wouldn't blame you. In fact, it makes my life a little bit easier because I will wager you've already read their bios, which means I can do a quick intro and we can get this show started. So without further ado, on the panel we have, joining us from the West Coast, Ali Hussain, Head of User Experience Design and at American Specialty Health. From right here in Toronto, we have Eugene, Design Lead at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And lastly, my colleague, Uzair Safera, Director Design and Innovation at Mobile Live. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's dive right into it, shall we? So let me start off with my first question. And I'm gonna start from the West and I'll move eastwards. My first question is, let's start by understanding what DesignOps is. Is it something the designers came up with after Devops became popular? Let me bring in Ali and get his thoughts on this question. Welcome, Ali.
Thanks, Imran. Glad to be here. Good morning to everyone on the West Coast and good afternoon. And hope you're having a great lunch on the East Coast. So yeah, so DesignOps, so let's just discuss a little bit around, before we talk about DesignOps, why is this even relevant? So we all know that design has never been more in demand, right? And there's a need for scaling that creativity. And design actually is a process, right? We all know that design needs time, we need the right tools, and more importantly, we need the right talent. So in order to produce the best outcomes, which is why we come to work, why design exists, it's for the quality and for the outcomes. That process, those tools and that talent can be and needs to be managed, it needs to be measured, and then therefore it needs to be improved as well, right? And whether you're a team of 1, 5, or 25, the way to orchestrate design needs to be purpose-built, and that will help you do your best work, feel fulfilled, and grow. So why I like DesignOps as a concept and as a practice is because it's an equal opportunity concept or practice, right? You don't need to be at a certain career level. You don't need to have a certain team size to benefit from it. You can actually be an early career designer or a seasoned leader, and you can apply DesignOps. You can be a design team of 1, or have an organization that's over 50 or 100. So at its core, what DesignOps will allow you to do or help you to do is to create more productive and more efficient workflows, find the right talent and the right skills, grow that talent and strengthen your design capability in your team, and improve the value and quality of your work. And that's done through a couple of those different components, right? So it's people, process, tools.
Agreed. So let me bring in Eugene on this as well. And I want to ask a follow-up question on this, Eugene. Is it something that you can buy off the shelf? Or is it something you have to envision, think about, and develop from ground up?
Yeah, so there's no one-size-fits-all solution here. I think to what Ali was saying, it's very situational depending on where you're at with your design practice within the organization that you live in. And I think there's value, different value with design teams of one to design teams of hundreds. And I think at the end of the day, if I want to distill it down and oversimplify it, it's about getting the best out of your people. And notice I said best, not the most. There's a clear distinction there. And the way that I frame it, and again, there's different variations of this. It's around, for me, people, culture, and process at the end of the day. And you want to make sure that there's a balance between all those three key pillars to make sure that you have an efficient organization and you're able to scale sustainably.
Right, right. And it seems like there's a theme about process, culture, people. I want to bring in Uzair from Toronto, and who happens to be my colleague as well. Uzair, when you joined Mobileye, like you were pretty much it, and you've been building up this practice over the last year and a half or so. So to you, what is DesignOps? How did you go from being just yourself and then creating a big team of designers and experts?
Thank you so much, Imran. So a great way to understand one of the great definitions I've come across is by Dave Maloof. His point is design ops includes everything that we are doing while we are not designing. So that covers a whole lot of stuff. And like my colleagues here mentioned, it covers the people part. How are we hiring people? How are we structuring the teams? How are we organizing them? How are we measuring their capabilities? So capabilities part is very essential when you're scaling design teams, and essentially design ops comes as a function of when we're talking about scaling design. So in terms of capabilities, mapping out people's strengths across the spectrum of design. There's no single person who would be able to carry all the design work, all the way from user research to visual design, accessibility. People have different talents and they have different skill set across different dimensions. So having a balanced team requires that we take a cognizant approach towards measuring people's capabilities and then balancing them off in a team so that overall the team is balanced, as some people are really good in visual design, some people are very, very excellent on user experience research aspect of things, and then there's some accessibility specialization. I do believe that people do need to be generalist, so they need to cover certain part of the other spectrum as well. So that's essentially the people part, and then there's the practice part. Again, you'll see different definitions from everybody, but essentially the concepts are very overlapping. So the practice part is how do we bring standardization, harmony. There's tool element to it. There's more efficiency element to it. And as Eugene said, it's about doing more with less, but effectively being more effective rather than. Often we go in the dimension of efficiency, which is not necessarily really productive. It is really how can we build on top of what we already have. And then there's also the dimension of impact. How are we setting up metrics for our work? How are we improving the customer experience? In large organizations, as we go from a team of, let's say 10, 15 to larger teams, it becomes really important that each team has its mission and charter defined. And they are sort of aligned around what problems are they solving for the customers that they're dealing with. And more importantly, what the parts of so in terms of digital, we have large number of user flows. So which user flow is this team responsible for, and what challenges are they addressing? So you also commented about DevOps, right? So it's interesting. Again, it's the way I see it, it's a factor of how people are scaling practices. So as development side is more and more maturing, the operation side is becoming more and more critical. And hence we're seeing this whole umbrella term of DevOps. And yes, we can draw parallels for that in terms of design ops as well. So it's not something that somebody came up with by looking at others or trying to copy. It's operations problem is real problem across the board. There, you will also hear other terms like research ops, innovation ops. So it's everybody trying to get best out of their talent and resources by operationalizing their areas of work.
Imran,
Right.
if I can jump in for a second, Uzair, when you were talking about this, and Eugene, what you mentioned, it seems to me that what we're describing is that design as a discipline has become more mature, right, than it was maybe, traditionally known as, maybe 20 years ago. And so therefore, as it becomes more mature, more grown up, you need to adopt certain ways of doing things that can allow you to improve and derive more value, and therefore, you hear a lot of these operational concepts, but that's really true. In order for design to really show the value that it could on a company or an industry, it needs to really have those operational excellence pieces built in, right? Hiring people, etc. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a very good point. My next question is around the value that it brings to organizations. What is the value that DesignOps brings for organizations? And you mentioned that it's been around for 20 years. I was thinking maybe it's a new buzzword in the last couple of years. Every 5 years or every decade, there's a theme and trend that everybody kind of jumps on. Is this something that's new? Has it been around for a number of years? Why are organizations talking about it now? So let me actually bring in Eugene and get his perspective on it, and then we'll come back to you, Ali.
Yeah, so from a buzzwords perspective, I think the term design ops is relatively new, but I think going back to the idea of why it comes to organizations, I mean, it's out of necessity at the end of the day, right? And at a certain point, you want to think about operations and the day-to-day, and to Uzair's point, like everything else that's required for design to or designers to be designing at the end of the day. And I think from a value point of view, it is about efficiency and your ability to scale as an organization. You want to make sure that at the end of the day, you're not just wasting resources, and because oftentimes designers also have to fight for a lot of the resourcing within a company, right? You don't get the benefit of the doubt. So, it's a way for us to sort of prove value along the way, and to make sure that at the end of the day, we're getting that voice or that seat at the table.
Right. Ali, I believe you wanted to say something on that as well.
No, I mean, I tend to agree, to Eugene's point, design ops as a term is new, but I would like to throw out that since design has existed, those designers have been doing design ops, right? And just if you bear with me for a second, it's, if design, we can draw a parallel to the design process to like cooking, right? Imagine a chef at a restaurant. The chef has other people helping them getting ingredients chopped and cut and ready and sauces prepared so that they're ready and they're there for that chef to use, right? So that chef doesn't have to actually go and do that work. A designer that may have been working with paper and pencil, right? The paper, the pencils that they buy, the workspace that they create, maybe others that they hire on to help them. That's all part of this kind of operational mindset to help them improve their design, right? Uzair said it's really about everything that goes into helping you with your outcomes that is not to do with designing, right? The act of designing, when you're designing, requires a lot of preparation and framing. So that's really, what I'd like to throw out is that it's existed, but now what we're doing is firming up a framework, we're giving it a name, and we're actually working to improve that process.
Standardization of it. It's interesting that you mentioned that. You mentioned the outcomes, and I always wonder, any IT initiatives, any operational excellence, unless it's tied to an outcome that relates to the business value, to the business objectives, it doesn't go very far. So, Uzair, let me bring you in and maybe have your thoughts on how does DesignOps really help improve the quality and time to market for organizations that are trying to, deliver those types of objectives to their customers and to their stakeholders.
So quality is, we talked about the harmony and standardization part. So bringing discipline across the board. So as you move from a team of, let's say, 10 people to 100 people, right? It's a rapid scale. And if the practice part, so Ali was mentioning that it has been around 20 years. We used to call it practice, right? That was a term that was used, that it's about how we do things, how we follow certain steps, and how we follow certain methods, and they need to be consistent across the board. And design directors were responsible to make sure those processes are followed. But what is being added now is, as design is modernizing, there's more things adding up more than the practice part. Like tools are being added that really bring in the efficiency. So your question was efficiency and speed to market. So let me give a few specific examples. So for example, design tools were not that mature initially. We are coming from a world where the design tools were designed for Photoshop and for print and media kind of experiences or interfaces, I would say, in retrospective. But now we are moving towards web and other assets. And these tools have come a really long way. We are not using Photoshop anymore. And we are using the likes of Figma and Sketch. And there's a lot of other tooling associated with it. Like, how do we do version controlling? How do we do sharing of assets across the board? How do we bring in a design system? All of these are essentially efficiency plays. So I can give you a quantifiable example around design system, which also falls under this bucket. Essentially, it helps you save a ton of time. So we estimated, like, if the components are pre-built for the designers, it could very well save them 30 to 40% of their time, because they don't have to think about the components that they're building the interface from. Rather, they're focusing more on executing it or building the entire interface. So it has lots of efficiency plays. You can do much more with the same amount of team that you have by bringing in this discipline of the entire DesignOps concept.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Uzair. I wonder if maybe Ali could walk us through an example, like an actual example, where you actually used DesignOps to help deliver value for your customers, for your organization.
Sure. So, as in my career, there are many times where I've seen, we were not either delivering the right quality, it was taking longer, maybe we were losing our best people, right? So usually that's a time where leaders go and try to look and be introspective and try to figure out what's going on, right? And that's really what I would say is, how I would start with DesignOps is really, and that's what I did, right? Is I thought about where is our time being spent? What are our designers actually doing? Or how much time is being spent not designing, right? That could be in meetings, could be in trying to communicate things, right? And that's what happened with us, is we found that designers were not being fulfilled, right, in their work, because they were spending time in meetings and trying to communicate to non-designers, right, and versus actually designing, which is what they thought they should be doing, which makes a lot of sense. And so what we did was, and then therefore, because they didn't have time, they were rushing to get their work done, and then the quality was suffering, right? So we did a small experiment, right? A side note is that anytime you're going to start DesignOps, start small, start somewhere, start quick, right? You don't wait too long, don't overthink it. And what we did was just, assign one person to just think about, what's actually going on, where they're spending their time. We found that they were spending, 60% of their time actually in communication and meetings. Now, I do agree that a designer, to do their best work, should be spending a lot of time talking to other people and understanding what they need to do. But in this case, they were wasting a lot of time that could have been in communicating their designs that could have been dealt with in the process of design, right? With the tooling that Ozair was talking about. So Figma and these other tools have tools for front-end designers to go in and do the inspect their dimensions and colors and things like that. So, there was a concept back in the day of redlining your designs. That doesn't need to happen anymore. You don't need to annotate all your designs, those features. So anyway, we implemented using Figma and using some of that design documentation, and that basically helped in that communication. So that's one example. So the thing I would leave you with is make sure you, instead of implementing something that someone else has done, try to look at your existing condition, try to look at where you need improvement, and then work on that specific area.
Right. It's always, take a look at your current state, understand your end state vision, and then figure out what the roadmap is. That's a formula that's kind of worked for me in my career. So I agree with you. But I have a follow-up question for Eugene on that. What happens if there's always a choice, right? You could choose to do something, or you could choose not to do something. So what happens if you don't do it, if you don't adopt DesignOps? Eugene, what do you think would happen?
Yeah, so going back to the whole idea of necessity, right? I think at a certain point, you're going to have a ceiling that you're going to hit, and you're not going to get past it until you're able to solve these issues, right? And I think, this is a crucial part of being able to scale. If you can't, use your team and your resourcing efficiently, you will get stuck at a certain point. And, you will experience pain, your team will experience the pain of not being able to get past that, I think.
Right. And since we're talking about doing versus not doing, what would you say were some of the biggest challenges when you decided to implement DesignOps, for example?
I think going back to Ali's point about making it bigger than it really is, I think if you just start somewhere, right? Look at the biggest pain points that you have and your team faces, and just start small and take it one step at a time. I think that's the sort of easiest and most efficient way of going about this. It's not this big bang thing, right? It's the day in and day out and the small wins and consistency over a long period of time.
Right. Yeah. That kind of brings me to my next question, which I want to bring Ozair in on, is you've been around the block for a number of years. You've helped a number of clients implement DesignOps. If you were to start over, in a given client situation, how would you go about doing things differently if you were to set up DesignOps?
I think I would second Imran in Eugene's point is starting it as lean experiments, taking a look at where we are, like you mentioned the term current state, measuring where our time is going. Again, borrowing from Ali's point. Why is it critical is because it points us in the direction where we can optimize things. For example, I'll give you an example. In many large organizations, what I see is people are stuck in hierarchies and processes and the way teams are structured. One very practical example, like we ran into a project when designers specified something, they built an experience, business was involved, they approved it, and then we do a handover to delivery team. Here you go. Now, certain design decisions were made, which designers did not have much idea around implementation. How complex would that be, one choice versus the other? So we ran into a lot of challenges on the delivery side. And the reason it was done is because the way teams were structured. So when we went back, we analyzed that we need to do things differently and not be bounded by these structures and processes that are limiting us from interacting and talking to each other. So we ended up designing a design dev handoff protocol, which is we need to bring in the developers early on into the discussions so that when we are designing the experiences, we have choices, we have multiple options. Which one is easier to implement from a developer perspective, but not much impact from a user experience point of view, probably, right? So it's efficiency as an overall system. So I think a lot of things I see in large organizations is we are stuck in processes and structures. So somehow we have to break them. And another thing I really believe in is that as a job as leaders, our goal should be to promote this thinking from our team members. They will bring in the best ideas. We just have to encourage them and ask them questions. How can we make your work more efficient? And that's where I learned from my team, like doing small things by co-creating with your other stakeholders. Again, going to the tooling part in Figma, very specifically an example is, so we have business system analysts working, gathering requirements. We have designers, and then there's developers. All three of them work in different tools. So business system analysts are capturing requirements in Confluence. Designers are working off Figma files, and then the developers are using Jira boards. Now the information is into three different pools. How do we make it more efficient in that they're going back and forth, like Ali was saying, spending so much time on communication? Simple fixes that by annotating stories into the frames of Figma, by linking the Figma frame into Confluence page and likewise into Jira, like I had that grand vision where anybody should be able to start either at the dev end and be able to come back to the design, or vice versa, go from the design end all the way, track it back to the requirement and the task that developers have to do. Now this solves a lot of problems for teams. So essentially, Imran, in the world of digital, we talk about it's about acceleration, and acceleration is moving fast. And how do we move fast? By removing roadblocks. So it all ties back and sums up is we have to remove these roadblocks, and that's the job of ours as leaders. And I think that's where learning best practices of DesignOps from each other, they help. And you had earlier mentioned that it's not something you can copy paste. Everybody's context is different. I think these forums like we are doing today are an excellent opportunity where we can learn from others how they solve the problem in their context, and then find out ways how can we apply it into ours.
Yeah, I think standardization is key when you say go from one end to the other and backwards, right? Unless there's common language, there's common understanding, it's not going to happen. Which kind of brings me to my next question. It's around, we've been talking about people, processes, tools, and I hear these terms in other disciplines as well. Like, we talked about Devops, we briefly touched on Agile. So I'm wondering if there is a parallel we can draw from, from the Agile mindset in terms of people and process, because tools are, you could say, yes, tools are specific to a discipline, but people and processes, it's kind of the same thing. So why don't I bring Ali into this and have you kind of give us your insight on this?
Sure, Imran, thanks. And, as Uzair was just describing, what he was talking about is, it just occurred to me that, the other way you could think about all of this is that it's really DesignOps is just the the way we're talking about applying user-centered design or human-centered design to the actual product design and development process, right? This is not just about design itself. It's really about the outcome, which needs all these other disciplines, right? Product managers, designers, QA, developers, et cetera. And so what we're really talking about is how can we create a process that addresses all, not just design or not just Agile, right? So coming back to Agile, I always believe that process should be, and we should have that it's in service of a strategy, not, just for design or for development, et cetera. Each of those have their own ways of doing things, right? But, there is, we all know that there is Agile is meant for delivery, right? It was developed to have better, more efficient delivery for development. And really, there is a friction in a lot of design teams and designers within Agile, right? It's not easy. And so, instead of trying to bring design into Agile, how do we improve the whole Agile workflow to include design, right? And DesignOps can really help bridge that gap, right? I hope that makes sense.
So does it complement the agile development process, or has to be integrated with it? How does it work?
Correct. Yeah, it's just like the agile mindset. There's a design ops mindset, which is to do what we've been talking about, is to help improve the outcome of a design team, right? And just like agile is improve the outcome of that whole product development delivery process, that includes design, right? I could even say that design is a part of that delivery. So, but up till now, agile really has not address some of the needs of design, like research ops, or having research before you're coming into solutions, right? So there's many different agile models out there, and I think I'll leave you with this: that yes, design ops is complementary to agile, but it cannot just be bolted on top or before or after, or it's really needs to be thought of as perhaps even reinventing the agile process with design ops as a part of it.
Great. I'm going to ask the same question to Uzair and then to Eugene.
So I don't think there is a lot of conflict. I think of like so let me say it this way: Agile philosophy is really about moving fast, delivering value to the customers, and validating them in short iterative steps. And if you talk about design, this is what design thinking also preaches, and we try to implement this into our real work as well, is really understanding the customer, coming up with ideas and experiments, taking them to market to validate that whether they work with those customers or it's really solving the right problem or not.
Sorry to interrupt here. When you say customer, exactly who are you referring to? Was there?
So customers are the customers of our products or services, right? The one that we are building products and services for. So in terms of mindset, I would say both things are complementary. It's the processes, so there's always the difference between the philosophy and the implementation. So what Ali was talking about is when we get stuck up in the implementation processes. The classic agile, the way it is implemented, it was designed to be more development focused. And they said, well, you could do 2 sprints in advance, some design work for it, or do some things in sprint. And that also introduces a lot of inefficiencies. Like one of the recent examples I came across was they were doing things in a sprint. So first week they would design, and the second week they would be developing. So now incredible waste of time that a designer is sitting idle the second week and the developer is sitting idle the first week. So sometimes when you talk mindset is all about coming up with ways how can we make things more efficient and not getting stuck with the process. And as Ellie said, process is serving the strategy. It should not hold us hostage.
Makes sense. Let's bring in Eugene and get his thoughts on it.
I agree with a lot of what Ali and Uzair said. I think there's definitely friction if you are trying to fit design within the traditional agile mold, right? In previous companies, I've tried different variations of agile, dual track, and even triple track as well. We've considered that, but I think trying to fit everything that design can help within a sprint is very difficult, right? If we look at it very simply. And I think that at the end of the day, if you're going back to agile principles, it's people over process, right? We're supposed to look at agile as a sort of a guide, not as the Bible at the end of the day. And I know some companies are very strict when it comes to following agile, but just like DesignOps, I think there's different flavors of agile, and it all depends on what works for a company. And going back to the idea of experimentation, just like you would do with DesignOps, you should experiment with what works for you in agile as well.
Yeah, I remember I was involved in a project last year where we had different teams. We had the product team, the POs, the UX team, then we had the development team and testing team, etc. And everybody was kind of doing things in silos on their own. So when you went and you talked to the head of the team, they would only just talk about their piece, and you couldn't really get an end-to-end view of when you were going to be able to deliver the product. So I think Uzair touched on it, and you did as well. It's very important that we simplify the processes and we integrate the things that we're doing in a sprint, so that it's an end-to-end view for anybody and whoever is involved in it. We are about 15 minutes away from our end of this webinar. I do have some questions from the audience, so I want to just throw them out to see if you guys want to respond to them. So the first question is, how does DesignOps tie into design maturity? So I'll just open it up, and whoever wants to answer that question.
I would say it goes hand in hand. I think to progress, and again, really depending on how you're measuring design maturity in your organization, but to progress from level to level, I think you really need to have the design ops portion down, especially when it gets to like level 4, level 5. You'll notice that some of those organizations spend a lot of resources just for design ops alone. And again, that goes back to necessity. That goes back to understanding the value that design ops brings.
Right. Anybody else want to chime in on it?
Yeah, the design ops is really a sign of maturity, right? It's you're actually thinking about, like you're saying, standardization and other ways to improve your overall design outcomes. And that's really what maturity is about. Now, there's maturity models out there. Fundamentally, you should always be improving. You should always be, and therefore you need to be changing, right? A lot of organizations are afraid of change, but change actually is in the DNA of design. Design is all about change. And so how do you manage that change effectively? And design ops can help you manage that change, can help you measure that change, can show the ROI of everything you're doing. And by the way, as we've mentioned, it's not just about design itself. It obviously helps design, but it helps the whole organization. So, there's no time to start like today, and start with those small, safe changes or things that you can improve on, and be curious and start on that maturity journey.
Great. I do have another question. And the question is, what are some things that I can do as a design team of one? That's an interesting one. As a design team of one. Let me bring in Uzair, because he was at one point a design team of one. So let us hear your thoughts on that, Uzair.
Yeah, so I think a design team of one, the needs are very different than at a design team of 100, for example, right? So a design team of one it means like a lot of stuff is coming your way, and you need to find ways to be more efficient. So I think in that case, you need to win more champions in the rest of the organization, make more and more friends. Many times you could work with developers to find ways of automating workflow. And working to implement, again, I'll go back to the same concept, in small experiments, which show and prove that doing things in that different way is much, much better, because it becomes a case study. You can go back to the other team and say, hey, I'm doing this new method or process or way with this other team, and it's working great. Why don't you adopt it as well? So, but again, it only happens when you quantify it. When you run it like an experiment, you measure it, you show success. So I think as a designer of one, that's your best bet is to like win more friends across the board and create partners.
So that's interesting. I can imagine like people would listen to you once you showed them the results. But when you were just starting out and saying, please like me and love me because I know what I'm talking about, did people listen to you?
It's not exactly like that, right? It's again building relationship at workplace. It's understanding understanding what they're trying to achieve, what you are achieving,
Right.
elevating them to a shared goal. Look, our goal is X, and I'm trying to help you. So we all need to work together, elevating it to the higher goal. I think that's where you will start winning in more traction. Going back to your leaders, showing them that that is the current state. Again, coming back to your words, current state, and this is what we can do much better. Let me run an experiment. I need your support. And I'm sure like as if you have good leaders, they will lend you support, provide you some air cover, free up some of your time to do that experiment. And then make sure you quantify it, make sure you share success stories far and wide. And then working with your leader, roll it out across the board. So it's a team effort. It's of course not just as simple as it's just wishing and praying that people start liking you.
Yeah, you expand your team beyond the DesignOps boundaries, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, everyone wants to be successful, right? And so if you can show them that you want them to be successful, they'll listen, right? They'll partner.
Yeah, I think the key thing I think I mentioned, one has to, or the team has to understand the business goals, the business objectives, and how what you're trying to achieve will map and align to those objectives. And I think that's how you bring everybody together, right?
That's probably another 2-hour discussion as well, which is designers need to change to understand business, and good designers really have a good understanding of business. Without that, right? Because that's the goal of design. It's to help drive value for your business and for the users of your business. So anyway, just, that thought occurred to me.
Yeah, I would love to continue for another 2 hours, but I know you got things to do and people to take care of.
Yeah.
I do have another question from the audience, and it says, what is the most difficult thing about DesignOps? I think some of it we covered already, but let me start off with Ali, and then I'll go to Eugene and Azir.
Yeah, I think it's not just the most difficult, but the most important as well, which is making sure you're working on the right thing, you're solving the right problem, right? Good design is also about ensuring that you're working on the things that matter, the problem that deserves to be solved, that should be solved, right? So I don't want people to get the wrong idea of just going in, doing a survey of your your efficiency or your where you're spending your time just because that's what we've been talking about. What if the problem is actually different? And sometimes it could be a second, third level problem. So, I also see another question in here that relates to something I was going to answer, which is about hiring, the people side of it, right? And that could be the problem. So, to tie that back to what you just asked, is making sure you're identifying the place in the problem to be solved is the most important part of this whole concept. And so there's a question from the audience around people side of things, and specifically looking at optimizing staff allocations and ensuring teams are working on the right things, right? How have you tackled designer resourcing in your organizations? That is an example. You might find that you may not have the right resourcing, you might not have the right allocations. That's why DesignOps has this quadrant or pillar around people. What does that mean? That means you have the appropriate and right job descriptions to deliver on your business goals, right? Don't just copy job descriptions. Create your own. Have career ladders. Designers need to know that there is a step beyond where they're currently at and where they could go. Have career ladders for both people leaders, because not everyone should be managing people, right? I think that's a rampant issue with corporate the corporate world. Put people in positions where they can be individual leaders, individual contributors. So there's an individual path, and then there's a people leader path. Have goals. So there's a whole process around people management. So and that will help you hire the right people, keep them for longer, retain them, right? That's a part of resourcing, and make sure that they're working on the right place in the right places.
Right.
Yeah. So just going, just to add a little bit to that too. I think the most difficult thing for me is juggling between those three pillars, right? I think out of the three for me, process is probably the easier one. At the end of the day, whenever you deal with people, it gets complicated always, right? Every designer is unique, right? They have their own sort of things that drive and motivate them, and it takes a lot of time and effort to make sure you're staying on top of that as well. And that also ties into culture. Like, these things don't happen without intention, and you have to make sure you're spending time there as well.
So I'll also add to that question of the people part. I think a big element of operationalizing design is also, again, borrowing from agile terms, having your backlog, having your tasks, having your capacity planning done. Specifically, the question is around resourcing, right? So it's, again, looking at how much work are we getting, and planning proactively. Ali talked about designer career paths. Very, very important part and aspect of DesignOps is the career paths. There are many frameworks out there. One of the great ones is the designer levels that I found out. It quantifies that having a clarity and definition around what do we expect in terms of behaviors around each level of a designer across a spectrum. Like, okay, communication. Are you leading the meeting? Are you driving the meeting? That's just one example of the one characteristic, right? So defining it and working with your team members and making sure that they understand where they are and what are the areas of improvement that they need to do to elevate themselves to the next level. I think career tracks is definitely one of the stated part of the people part of the DesignOps.
Wonderful. So we have a few more minutes left. I wanted to ask each one of you if there was one thing you wanted to leave the audience with, what would it be? So let's start with Eugene.
Yeah, I think this actually answers one of the questions as well in terms of who evangelizes it. I think it's everyone's sort of responsibility to do it on the design team. I think the leaders should be driving it and setting the foundational stuff, but it's up to all the members of the team to move it forward and make sure that it's constantly improving over time, right? And with the idea of treating it like you treat product design. Make sure that you're intentionally iterating on it.
Okay. How about you, Ali?
So I would just leave you with that, smaller, safer, sooner is the key to get started with change. And so, don't overthink this, and, just start somewhere.
Azair?
I'll go back to Eugene's point and the same question that Eugene was referring to. I think it's promote the mindset in the organization that people bring in ideas for efficiency and improvement all the time. As leaders, it's our goal to quantify and see how many experiments are we doing, how many things have we tried out to improve things. And as team members, my expectation is that people, when you're not in the lead position, you are in the early stages of your career, you should always go back to the leaders, proposing ideas and clearly articulating them. Now, I also want to address one last question, which is like, how do you work with engineers? I think it's also, again, understanding where the leadership structures are, not necessarily sometimes in design. Sometimes you have to go to the leadership structures with PMs or product owners. And again, find ways and articulate to them how can we improve things, running small experiments, and then scaling them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. And my colleague, Chris, was going to do a couple of poll questions. I'm not sure if we were able to get some responses from the poll questions, but our time's almost up. I wanted, if your questions didn't get answered, please follow up, and we'll try our best to respond. I wanted to give special thanks to all of you, Ali, Joe, and Eugene, for joining us, for being with us on the panel today. I know I learned a fair bit, and judging by the engagement and questions rolling in, I think it's safe to say others perhaps did as well. Thanks everyone for joining, and keep an eye out on our social media channels for not only more upcoming webinars and events, but also a recording of today's session. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and enjoy the long weekend. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.